Adrian Vale stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, staring down at the city lights. The rain matched his bitter mood. His grandfather's will had been absolute. He had to marry within 30 days or lose control of Vale Enterprises forever. He had no time for romance, only a bizarre advertisement placed discreetly for a temporary life partner, offering a sum of money no sane person could refuse. Sienna Hayes was exhausted. Her waitress uniform still smelled of cheap diner coffee, but the advertisement she held in her hand promised a way out of her crushing debt. When she walked into the imposing glass tower for the interview, Adrian expected someone easily manipulated by his wealth. Instead, Sienna looked him dead in the eye, refusing to be intimidated. When he offered her a seat with a wave of his hand, she remained standing, questioning the absurd terms of the contract with a sharp tongue that left him entirely speechless. The wedding was a cold, contractual affair, a sterile courtroom, a few signatures, and it was done. As they stepped out into the flashing cameras, Marcus Devereaux, Adrian's biggest corporate rival, stood at the edge of the crowd with a knowing, venomous smirk. That night, Sienna refused Adrian's offer to buy her an entirely new wardrobe, insisting on keeping her own clothes. She made it clear she was here for a job, not to be his personal doll. Living in the penthouse was a clash of completely different worlds. They argued over everything. She openly mocked his empty, meticulously scheduled life, exposing the absolute loneliness behind his billions. But late one night, when Sienna fell asleep on the couch going over accounting books, Adrian found himself gently draping a blanket over her shoulders. He lingered for a moment, listening to her quiet breathing. The tension between them slowly shifted into something dangerously warm. The fragile peace shattered when the private investigator Adrian had hired to vet her background delivered a thick file. Adrian opened it, and his blood ran cold. Sienna's father had owned a small logistics firm, one that Vale Enterprises had aggressively bankrupted and absorbed a decade ago. His family's ambition had ruined hers. Consumed by guilt, Adrian withdrew. He became silent, cold, leaving the penthouse early and coming home late. Sienna, completely unaware of the file, felt the sudden sting of his rejection. Yet, amidst the crushing silence, he tried to apologize without words. He left a cup of her favorite diner coffee on the kitchen counter every morning before she woke up. He abruptly cancelled an important board meeting just to sit in the same room while she read, simply needing to be near her. The silence was violently broken when Marcus Devereaux cornered Sienna at a high-profile charity gala. Marcus revealed he knew everything about her father, framing Adrian as a monster who married her as a sick, twisted joke. He threatened to go to the press, to destroy Adrian's stock and expose the marriage as a fraud, unless Sienna helped him sabotage Vale Enterprises from the inside. Instead of breaking, Sienna went straight to Adrian. The pain in her eyes was real when she confronted him about the past, but so was her loyalty. Together they turned the tables. At the main event of the evening, as Marcus prepared to casually launch his smear campaign with journalists nearby, Adrian took the microphone. With devastating precision, he presented undeniable evidence to the media of Marcus's offshore embezzlement. Investors watched in absolute horror as Marcus was escorted out of the ballroom, his reputation entirely destroyed in a matter of minutes. Back in the quiet safety of their home, Adrian did something he had never done in his entire life. He begged for forgiveness. He did not use his money or his power, just his honest, broken words, apologizing for his company's past and his own recent cowardice in hiding the truth. Sienna saw the raw vulnerability in the billionaire's eyes and finally let go of the anger she had carried for so many years. She reached out, pulling him into a sincere embrace. The seasons changed, and the cold contract that brought them together was nothing but a distant memory. With Adrian's unyielding support, Sienna opened her own business, providing financial consulting for small family firms to protect them from corporate predators. They built a real life together, far richer than any bank account could ever measure. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear a good love story. Subscribe to the channel to follow our next stories. We will see you next time. Nathaniel Cross paced the length of his mahogany office, the heavy silence of the room doing nothing to calm his fury. His grandfather had just delivered the ultimate ultimatum: marry within the week to prove his stability, or step down as the chief executive of Cross Industries. It was a blatant manipulation, a desperate attempt to control him, but Nathaniel had no intention of losing the empire he had built. He did not need love. He needed a business transaction, someone who would sign the papers, play the part, and stay out of his way. Lila Monroe was invisible to the executives who walked the halls of Cross Industries during the day. As part of the evening cleaning staff, she only saw the remnants of their power and wealth. She was scrubbing a stubborn stain near the elevators when Nathaniel stepped out, utterly distracted, and knocked his expensive coffee right out of his own hand, splashing it across the floor she had just cleaned. When he carelessly handed her a handful of cash and told her to clean it up quickly, Lila stood up straight. She ignored the money, handed him the cleaning cloth, and told him that gravity was his fault, not hers. Nathaniel froze. No one ever spoke to him like that. Looking at her fierce, unyielding expression, an absurd and brilliant idea began to form in his mind. Within 48 hours, they were sitting in a private judge's chamber, signing a legally binding marriage contract. Lila had agreed only because the ridiculous sum he offered would finally pull her out of the suffocating debt she carried. As they exited the courthouse, a sudden flash of cameras blinded them. Standing across the street, watching with narrowed, calculating eyes, was Penelope Ashby. Penelope was Nathaniel's ex-fiancée, a woman who had always viewed his wealth as her rightful property, and she looked thoroughly displeased by this sudden, secret wedding. Life in Nathaniel's sprawling estate was a battlefield of wills. He tried to control the narrative, having a luxury boutique deliver a wardrobe worth more than Lila would ever earn in a lifetime. Lila promptly boxed it all back up, leaving it by the front door and informing him she was his contracted wife, not a mannequin he could dress up to soothe his ego. But the sharp edges between them began to soften in unexpected ways. When Nathaniel caught a severe flu and refused to stop working, it was Lila who quietly took away his laptop, forced him into bed, and made him a simple steaming bowl of soup, staying by his side until his fever broke. In the quiet darkness of his bedroom, stripped of his suits and his arrogance, he looked at her with a profound, unspoken gratitude. The fragile connection shattered on the night of the company's annual banquet. Penelope had not been idle. Halfway through the evening, a leaked audio recording began circulating on the phones of every board member in the room. It was an old voicemail Lila had sent to her sister, bitterly stating that she was only taking the billionaire's money because Cross Industries was the very company that had ruthlessly bankrupted their family's bakery years ago. The recording made it sound like a calculated, vengeful plot. Nathaniel saw the whispers, heard the recording, and felt a cold, crushing betrayal lock around his chest. He retreated behind a wall of ice. For weeks, they lived like ghosts in the same house. He spoke to her only when necessary, his words clipped and formal. Yet the punishment of his silence was broken by his own undeniable longing. He would leave her favorite wild lilies on the kitchen island without a card, or have his driver take her to her favorite quiet spots in the city while he watched from the window. The money did not matter to him anymore. He realized with agonizing clarity that the truth of her past hurt so much because he had genuinely started to care for her. Sensing the fracture in their marriage, Penelope made her final move. She called an emergency board meeting, intent on proving that Nathaniel was emotionally compromised, his marriage a fraudulent sham, and that she should be reinstated into the inner circle of the company. She cornered Lila in the hallway before the meeting, mocking her humble background and threatening to drag her family's name through the mud if she did not sign divorce papers immediately. But Penelope underestimated them both. Nathaniel walked into the hallway and stood firmly beside Lila, their fingers intertwining in a silent vow of solidarity. They walked into the boardroom together. Before Penelope could utter a single accusation, Nathaniel projected a series of encrypted emails onto the screen. He had spent the last 2 weeks quietly investigating the past. The emails proved unequivocally that Penelope, acting as a rogue consultant years ago, had orchestrated the illegal financial squeeze that destroyed Lila's family business, entirely without Nathaniel's knowledge. The room erupted. Penelope turned pale as the investors she had brought to support her immediately stood up and distanced themselves, abandoning her to the devastating consequences of her own fraud. When the dust settled and the penthouse was quiet once more, Nathaniel turned to Lila. There were no cameras, no board members, and no contracts. He confessed that the real tragedy was that it took a crisis for him to see what truly mattered. He apologized not just for the past mistakes of his company, but for doubting the woman who had cared for him when he was at his most vulnerable. He asked for the privilege of starting over, not as an employer and an employee, but as a man asking the woman he loved for a real chance. 2 years later, there were no fake contracts left to sign. On a beautiful, sunlit afternoon, they stood before their closest friends and renewed their vows, this time bound only by an unbreakable affection. With Nathaniel's backing, Lila had successfully reopened her family's bakery, transforming it into a beloved city landmark, proving that true wealth was found in the things you could rebuild together. If you found yourself swept away by this journey of unexpected love and redemption, share this story with someone who needs a reminder that true connection cannot be bought. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss our upcoming stories. We look forward to seeing you in the next one. The deafening crash of collapsing scaffolding echoed through the busy financial district, sending a cloud of dust over the panicked crowd. Julian Ashford, the notoriously ruthless chief executive of the Ashford Group, had been walking to his waiting car when the steel beams fell. Without a second thought, he lunged forward, shielding a young kindergarten teacher from the falling debris. By the time the dust settled, the cameras were already flashing. The images of the billionaire rescuing a local teacher saturated the media overnight. Facing a devastating quarterly loss, Julian's board of directors saw a golden opportunity. They demanded he marry the hometown hero to salvage the company's plunging public image and secure their volatile stock. Margot Ellis was still shaking from the near miss when Julian's formidable legal team arrived at her modest apartment. Offering a staggering sum for a temporary marriage contract, Margot needed the money desperately for reasons she kept entirely to herself, but she refused to be bullied by men in expensive suits. She demanded that Julian ask her himself. When the billionaire finally stepped into her cramped living room, expecting gratitude, Margot crossed her arms. She stared him down, exposing the absolute emptiness of his corporate strategy, and told him she would only agree if she maintained total control over her personal life. Intrigued and slightly unbalanced by her fierce independence, Julian agreed. The ceremony was a blindingly bright media spectacle, devoid of any real affection. As Margot moved her few belongings into Julian's sprawling, silent penthouse, she firmly rejected the elite interior decorators he hired to upgrade her wardrobe. She wore her simple clothes, making it clear she was a contracted partner, not a purchased trophy. Watching from the edge of the lavish wedding reception was Genevieve Roth, an old college acquaintance who had recently and aggressively inserted herself back into Margot's life under the guise of friendship. Genevieve smiled sweetly at the cameras, but her eyes held a sharp, calculating gleam. Living together forced Julian and Margot into a relentless battle of wills. He tried to manage her daily schedule with the same rigid control he applied to his executives. She completely ignored his directives, choosing to take the subway to her teaching job and leaving his assigned chauffeurs waiting in the driveway. The constant friction slowly gave way to an undeniable simmering attraction. Late one evening, Julian paused in the hallway, listening as Margot whispered a tender, tearful lullaby over the phone to someone she called her little brave man. He saw a profound vulnerability in her that made his chest ache, though his pride kept him from asking her about it. The delicate tension between them snapped on a rainy Tuesday. Margot received a frantic phone call and sprinted out of the penthouse, leaving a trail of dropped papers. Julian, alarmed by the sheer panic on her face, followed her to the city hospital. Pushing through the emergency room doors, he found Margot weeping beside a small hospital bed. In the bed was Leo, her 4-year-old son from a previous relationship, recovering from a severe asthma attack. Margot had hidden the boy, terrified that Julian's cutthroat media circus would tear her small, fragile family apart. Feeling entirely deceived, Julian retreated behind a fortress of cold silence. For days he treated her like a stranger, the air between them heavy with unspoken disappointment. Yet, he could not bear to see her suffer. Without saying a word to her, Julian quietly paid off all of Leo's mounting medical bills. He hired the best pediatric respiratory specialists in the country to oversee the boy's care. One evening, Margot looked out the hospital window and saw Julian's recognizable luxury car parked in the pouring rain. He had cancelled a crucial international summit just to sit in the parking lot, silently watching over them, unable to walk away. While Margot was distracted by her son's recovery, Genevieve made her move. The fake friend had secretly sold Margot's story to a vicious tabloid, planning to expose the secret child at the Ashford Group's most prestigious charity gala. Genevieve intended to frame Margot as a gold digger who abandoned her sick child for a billionaire's penthouse, a scandal guaranteed to destroy the Ashford stock and earn Genevieve a massive payout. At the height of the glittering gala, Genevieve took the microphone, gesturing toward the massive projection screens, ready to play a distorted video to the horrified elite crowd. But Julian had always been one step ahead. Before the video could play, the screens went black. Julian walked onto the stage, taking the microphone from a stunned Genevieve. With steady, unyielding authority, he announced to the entire room that he was the proud stepfather to a wonderful boy named Leo. Then, with a dangerous smile, Julian revealed that he had purchased the very tabloid Genevieve was working for just 3 hours prior. He exposed her sabotage in front of the city's most powerful people. Stripped of her weapon and utterly humiliated, Genevieve was escorted out of the silent ballroom by security, her social and professional life completely dismantled. Leaving the gala early, Julian rushed back to the quiet sanctuary of the hospital room. Standing in the dim light beside the sleeping child, the billionaire dropped all of his defenses. He did not offer expensive gifts or grand corporate promises. He simply looked at Margot, his voice thick with emotion, and apologized for letting his pride blind him to her pain. He confessed that his empire meant nothing if he had to go back to the empty, lonely life he lived before she and Leo crashed into his world. Margot, seeing the absolute sincerity in his eyes, finally let her walls fall, stepping into his arms to forgive him. A year later, the sprawling city penthouse was sold. Julian had stepped down as the chief executive, leaving the Ashford Group in the hands of a trusted board. They moved to a quiet, sunlit coastal town where the air was clean and the ocean breeze swept through the windows. Margot opened a small community learning center, while Julian spent his days managing local charities and teaching Leo how to skip stones on the water. They had left the ruthless world of billionaires far behind, choosing a simple, beautiful life that belonged entirely to them. If this story brought a smile to your face, share it with someone who appreciates a tale of true redemption and family. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you can join us for the next great story. We will see you next time.
Besadú no Rotero enviado anteriormente. Texto colado. Editar. The infographic shows that these stories are not simply fantasies about wealth, luxury, and romance. At their core, they explore what happens when power, fear, inequality, and emotional isolation collide with honesty, care, and responsibility. Adrian and Sienna, Nathaniel and Lila, and Julian and Margot all begin through a contract rather than genuine affection. The men see marriage as a solution to protect a company, an inheritance, or a public image, while the women accept because financial pressure has limited their choices. Money therefore shapes the relationship before trust has a chance to grow. The pattern begins with a forced arrangement and a clash between two worlds. The wealthy men are used to control, rigid routines, and emotional distance. The women come from lives shaped by debt, work, family duty, and survival. Their refusal to become decorative trophies challenges the men's ideas about status and authority. Sienna keeps her own clothes, Lila rejects the luxury wardrobe, and Margot protects her son and private life. Their choices prove that dignity cannot be purchased. Psychologically, the male characters use control as self-protection. Wealth helps them avoid vulnerability, but it also leaves them lonely. The women weaken these defenses through small acts of care. A blanket over tired shoulders, a cup of familiar coffee, a bowl of soup during illness, or silent support at a hospital becomes more meaningful than an expensive gift. These moments show that attachment grows through presence, consistency, and empathy. Each story reveals a wound connected to betrayal or corporate harm. Sienna discovers that Adrian's company destroyed her father's business. Lila is accused of seeking revenge after her family bakery was ruined. Margot hides her son because she fears public cruelty. These secrets create distance because both partners fear humiliation, rejection, or exploitation. Trust returns only when the truth is faced honestly. The public scandals represent the pressure of media, reputation, and social judgment. Marcus, Penelope, and Genevieve weaponize private pain for personal gain. Their actions show how vulnerable people can be manipulated when powerful systems value image more than truth. The turning point arrives when the couples stop protecting appearances and choose accountability. The men use their influence not to dominate the women, but to expose corruption, defend their families, and admit their failures. The central lesson is that redemption requires more than an apology. Adrian, Nathaniel, and Julian change their behavior. They support the women's goals, repair damage, and build relationships based on partnership rather than control. Sienna helps small businesses, Lila rebuilds her family bakery, and Margot creates a learning center while raising Leo in a healthier environment. Wealth changes from a symbol of power into a tool for restoration. This is why the stories feel satisfying. They imagine justice for people harmed by powerful systems, reward honesty and loyalty, and show that love can grow after conflict when both people are willing to change. The real fantasy is not becoming rich. It is being seen beyond social status, believed after betrayal, respected despite inequality, and loved without surrendering one's identity.